While lumber prices have come down from their highs, the past year and a half has been a real roller coaster with prices quadrupling in many cases. Where's all the money going? Who's behind these prices? Who's making all of this money? Well, in this video, I'll answer that question and explain exactly who is getting rich and how much money they're making. So stick around. Harvesting lumber is difficult and dangerous work. In fact, logging is one of the most dangerous professions in the country, with more fatalities per capita than almost any other profession. And yet, loggers are basically making the same amount of money as before the huge increases in lumber prices. The same goes for other people in the supply chain, from truck drivers to mill workers. Even landowners aren't making any more money. So who is making all of the money? The answer here is clear, and that is the large lumber harvesting and lumber mill companies. Some of these companies own millions of acres of their own forest land, and in some cases they may also own factories that produce sheet goods like plywood. Here is a list of the 10 largest lumber producing companies in the US. 5 of these companies are privately owned by either larger companies, individuals, or families. These private companies do not produce publicly available financial statements, and so there's no way for us to know exactly how much money they're making. But these 5 companies are publicly traded and owned by mostly large institutions and mutual funds. Being publicly traded also means that they're required to file publicly available financial statements. And so I looked into each one of them to see just how much money they're actually making. First, I have here a graph of the net income of these companies for the past 10 years, including 2020. Now, 2019 was clearly a down year, and 4 out of the 5 companies lost money. But in 2020, you can see that their income jumped up to the point that each of these companies was making at least the same amount of money, and in some cases more money than they were making in 2018. Here's where it gets crazy though. Each of these companies has already reported their first, second, and third quarter earnings for 2021. And when I add the net income for those first 3 quarters together, this is what you get. So far in 2021, Weyerhaeuser has brought in nearly $2.2 billion. West Fraser has brought in over $2.6 billion, and the other 3 have brought in a combined $2.5 billion. That is just for the first 3 quarters of 2021, and that is their net income after all of their expenses. If these current trends continue, they are on track to make more money in 2021 than in the previous 7 years combined. That is crazy. There are a few other companies out there that are making a ton of money too, but the further down the chain you get, the smaller these companies tend to be, and they tend to be private, which again means that they don't normally produce publicly available financial statements. But here are a few of the bigger ones that do. Boise Cascade, Louisiana Pacific Corporation, and Resolute Forest Products are all companies that manufacture forest products like plywood and laminated beams and the like. And Builders FirstSource is one of the largest lumber wholesalers in the country. If we look at their earnings, we see some of the same things. 2019 was a down year, and then a bump up in 2020, and a huge increase so far in 2021. So now let's talk about the companies that everyone loves to hate, and that is Lowe's and Home Depot. Now, most regular people who aren't in building and construction in the US are buying their lumber from one of these big box home improvement stores, and their lumber prices have been out of control this year too. So what's going on there? Well, because these retailers sell a ton of different products, it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what they're making on just lumber. But in their annual report for 2020, they do provide some insight. Now here's a graph of the past 5 years of lumber sales before expenses at Lowe's and Home Depot, taken from figures in each of their financial reports. For both Lowe's and Home Depot, 2020 lumber sales were about 30% higher than the average of the previous 4 years. Now, the problem here though is that again, because they sell far more than just lumber, they don't publish their lumber sales figures in their quarterly reports, only in their annual reports. So we really won't know how much money they've made on just lumber until they file their annual report next year. But here's what I suspect. I think that for the first half of 2021, they're going to show great lumber sales. But I think that the second half of the year will really tell a different story. I think that both of these companies will have a huge drop because they paid very high prices to stock their shelves full of lumber that is now selling for much lower prices. And they get left holding that high-priced inventory while the lumber companies laugh all their way to the bank. Not that you should feel sorry for Lowe's and Home Depot. They're not victims here. They're making still plenty of money. But really, only time will tell, and we won't know exactly how much lumber they are selling until they file their annual reports for next year. Now, there are a couple of last points that I want to make, and I think that they're important in understanding the mentality of these lumber companies and what they're probably going to do with all of this money that they're making. Now, this last graph I want to show is a combined pre-pandemic net income of the largest 5 companies over the past 25 years. And what I want to demonstrate through this graph is that lumber production is a cyclical business that's tied mostly to new home construction. In fact, if I superimpose US housing starts for the same period, those 25 years, the pattern of this graph begins to make a lot more sense. Again, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for these companies, but rather what I want to show is that these companies are not going to live high off the hog. They're going to be running their business like they're losing money, because next year they may be losing money. They're going to lay off workers, they're going to close unproductive mills, they're going to sell off unproductive divisions. They're going to work on being lean and reducing expenses so that they can survive the next downturn. Now, that could be good for consumers in the long run. They may be able to produce lumber for cheaper. They may be able to be more efficient if these lumber companies make investments, if they really work on making their production facilities and their operations a lot more productive, if they put in more technology. It could make them more competitive, and that could drive prices down. In the end, though, it's these lumber companies that are making all the money, and they're making billions. So what do you think? Are lumber prices still high where you are? Have they come down recently? Have they come down and now they're starting to creep back up? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. I hope that you found the video interesting. If you did, be sure to give me a thumbs up on the video, and be sure as always to subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos, and we'll see you in the next one.